Right, everyone, welcome to my session this afternoon. We'll try and get this through pretty quickly because I know you want to get down to your drinks. Today we're going to talk about identity management in Office 365, which one's right for you. My name's Brendan Ross. I'm a solution advisor at Datacom. It's a fancy title for being a consultant. I've been working with Office 365 for 4 years. I actually started with its predecessor BPOS, and I also specialise in Azure infrastructure. So today we're going to talk about, whoops, not too many slides. So today's key message really about identity in Office 365, and when I talk about identity in 365, this also applies if you're looking at Azure or you're wanting to start adopting things in Azure later on, because 365 uses Azure Active Directory, and so you can expand that across both 365 and Azure. The key message is start simple. There's no need to rush to a full federated model or even a synchronized model. Start with a really simple model, get to understand 365, get to understand how identity works. You can always move through the models, and I'll explain how we can do that later on. So a couple of things we're going to cover in today's session, the agenda here. So I'm going to go through the 3 different types of models. So we've got a cloud identity model, synchronized identity model, and the federated identity model. And I'll give you some tips and tricks if you're looking for those and what you can do using those models. And I've based those on some scenarios around a new drink called Giga that's hit the market, and how there's some different companies that are selling and distributing the Giga drink and how they're using the different models for their businesses. And then we'll talk about some new features that have come out. So scenario 1 is a company that has some small supermarkets around the country. They've got 3 stores and 8 email accounts. They have no on-premise servers. So this is your kind of typical very small business in New Zealand. It's kind of also typical maybe of a small business that has a small business server. Maybe they're running a 2003, 2008 small business. Cloud identity is good for them. They can create user accounts in Office in the 365 portal. Your authentication takes place in 365. So you go to the 365 portal, you type in your email address and your password, and Azure AD is doing the authentication, and they can access 365 services. It also includes self-service password reset. So that's now a feature available on all 365 SKUs. So users, you don't need to do it for them. It takes a lot of load off admin. Great, again, for a small business who may not have IT support. So that's a really good use for a cloud identity model. It's also very useful if you're doing a pilot. So if you just want to get and understand and just maybe see how 365 could work for you, start with a cloud identity model. Create a couple of accounts in the portal, in the web page, and start using it. Some tips and tricks. So as I say, a great way to pilot 365. You can still use your own domain name. So when you sign up for 365 for the first time, you need to create a unique company name and then .onmicrosoft.com. So it might be Contoso nz.onmicrosoft.com. You can then go add your domain name and start using your email address or your domain name. So you can do that. And a trial has 25 accounts. You get 30 days. You can extend that in the portal. Of course, if you run the session here previously, if you've been to some of the other sessions, you know that you can now get Windows 10 to join Azure Active Directory. So once you've created those accounts, even just through the portal, you can get a Windows 10 machine to join Active Directory. And there's a URL there about how you can do that. And you can get a bit of control and management. So if you do have a small business server, you don't necessarily want to have to synchronize accounts. You could just use the cloud identity model and get that management controlled and that authentication through the Azure AD that you might have done previously with a on-prem AD server. And also Windows 10 gives you a very close to a single sign-on experience that we haven't had before. Maybe you're restructuring your AD, so if you're maybe merging some domains together, you've bought another business, maybe you don't have it very well structured to move to a synchronized model, you've got users in lots of different OUs, then start with the cloud identity first, and then you can introduce a synchronized model later on. You can import a list of users, so you don't have to sit there and create 30 or 40 users one at a time. You can create a CSV with all the details you need and just import that in, so you can make it quick. And it supports third-party migration tools. So if you're using something like Skykick, or some of the other third-party tools, or maybe doing a manual migration, maybe just importing some PSTs, that certainly works that way well. And if you do have an on-premise server, although we talk about in the synchronized model, doing synchronized if you have on-prem, doesn't mean you have to. You can still have users created in the cloud and on-prem. Of course, they have different login names and different passwords, so there's a bit of admin there, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it. So in our second scenario, we're talking about our logistics company, Bing. They distribute the new GigaDrink. They're a bit larger organization, so they've got 3 distribution centers, 42 staff members, and 6 on-premise servers, and they want staff to use their same sign-in name and password as they use to log on to a PC. So there's a clear distinction between a federated identity, where we talk about single sign-on, and a synchronized identity, where we talk about same sign-on. So using the same credentials, but I'll be prompted every time I want to access a 365 service. This is typical of your kind of medium-sized business in New Zealand. And so how does that work? Well, we run AD Connect or Azure Active Directory Sync, and we synchronize the accounts from our on-premise AD account, AD server, into Windows Azure. Passwords are transmitted. Now, we don't transmit the password itself. We take the password and we do a hash on it. You know, it's a mathematical logarithm. It's quite hard to reverse. And that produces a digest. The digest is further processed within SHA-256 encryption, and then it's transmitted to Azure using SSL. So it's very secure. So we're not storing the password, we're storing a digest of it. We're still authenticating in Office 365, but we can't manage the accounts now in Office 365. I'll show you that later on in the demo. If you go into 365 and try and change display name for a user, it'll tell you can't do that. We have to do it on-prem and then wait for it to synchronize up to 365. Now, once we have those accounts in Azure AD, we can use them for other third-party services. So, lo and behold, you can use them for Google Docs, Dropbox, Citrix, GoToMeeting, Salesforce, and your own custom apps. So say if you want to start expanding and doing more things in Azure, then you can use these accounts that you've now synchronized up to access those applications. So tips and tricks. As I say, use AD Connect. You can deploy in just 4 clicks and get synchronization going, or you can do fully customized options, and I'll do a demo on that for you a little bit later on. You can still use some of the other tools. So if you go to the 365 portal and you go through the process about how to do DirSync, it'll give you a link to download the DirSync tool. But I wouldn't use it. It's old. The new AD Connect's much easier to use, much more reliable, more features. But it is still supported. You must maintain an Exchange server. So if you had Exchange on site before, and you've now done DirSync, and you had to migrate your mailboxes, we need a way to edit the email attributes. We can't do that inside Azure users and computers. We can only do that with an Exchange console. There are other third-party tools that you can do that. You can use ADSI Edit, but that's obviously playing with danger. You can have reverse syncing from Azure AD back to on-prem, but we need the Azure AD premium subscription. It's around about $7 a user a month for that. We need that because if we change the password in 365, it's going to get overwritten in the next synchronization cycle as we do another sync. And with Azure AD Premium, you can do the self-service password reset, again, because that password can now get synchronized back to our local AD when it gets changed. Otherwise, as I said, it would get overwritten. Now, one trick, if you're going to do a third-party migration tool, is not to migrate the MS Exchange Mailbox GUID. If you have migrated that, synchronized that to 365, what you're telling 365, well, what it's preventing you from doing is creating a mailbox. You'll sign a subscription to a user, but it won't create the mailbox, because it's assumed you're going to use the migration tools that are in Office 365, to do the migration. And it's going to create the mailbox automatically, or if you're doing a hybrid one, it's going to move it from your on-prem Exchange to 365. So we don't want to migrate that. If you've already done it, you need to run a PowerShell command to null it out of the Azure AD. And then you can do something like Skykick, or so you maybe use a manual process. You want to create the mailbox. Maybe you just want a blank mailbox. Maybe you want to import some, do some PST files. You want to export only a couple of weeks of email and import that in. So that's a little trick. A couple other things. So when you do migration and you're using synchronized, because we want to maintain those email attributes on-prem, we want to convert the mailbox to a mail-enabled user. We don't want to delete it, because we know when we delete a mailbox in Exchange, it's going to delete the AD account. It's not going to end well. And we don't want to disconnect it. We want to do a conversion to a mail-enabled user, and then we can clean up the mailbox and purge it. You can then obviously go into your Exchange console, and you'll see the user now, rather than as a mailbox, it'll be a contact. So mail-enabled contact, mail-enabled user. Actually, before I move on, a couple other things as well. The user UPN name for logins, the user principal name. So obviously in AD, you might have set up your Active Directory, it might be contoso.local. That's not a publicly routable domain. There is no high-level domain called local. You can't get to that over the internet. So we've got to use your company domain, your internet domain. And so all your users need to use that, so you need to set that up in AD. That's what they're going to use to log on to 365. It's what they're going to use to log on to all cloud services. So you should start getting users to use that when they log onto their PC. So they might be using their short NetBIOS name, your sort of pre-2000 NT4 type name. They should now really start be using their email address or whatever you set their UPN is. And then it's a consistent experience as to whether they're logging on locally or they're logging on into the cloud. It's the same username for them to do that. Right, so as I said, I'll do a demonstration on, deep dive. So if you want to learn a bit more about 365, a bit more behind the scenes stuff, there's a session on tomorrow, a peek inside the sausage factory, which sounds very interesting to attend. So I'm going to do a demo about setting up the synchronized identity using AD Connect. AD Connect, as I said, has two install modes, Custom and Express. The Custom option gives you the more advanced options. You can synchronize multiple forests or domains. So if you've got two different forests or multiple domains, or maybe you just purchased a company and you want them both in a 365 in a single tenant, the advanced option will let you do that. If you're running LDAP 3, and soon you'll be able to synchronize from SQL. You can deploy a pilot group of users, so you can add some users to an AD group and just have them set up as a pilot. You can do the single sign-on using Federation, so to go through and set that up. So previously, without AD Connect, you had to do a number of prerequisites yourself. It was quite a long, complicated process to do. It's now all sort of wizard-driven, and you can just go and tick all the relevant options, answer the relevant questions, and it will do a lot of that work for you, which is why you really need to start using AD Connect. You can configure the AD Prem features. So if you want to write that back at the password. And coming soon, you'll be able to write back users, groups, and computer accounts. So again, it comes back to that Windows 10 thing. We can get a Windows 10 machine to join Azure AD and get that information synced back to your on-prem. You can synchronize custom attributes to the cloud. So maybe you've extended your schema, or you're using some of the attributes inside AD for special features. So maybe the description is what applications they get access to, or something that you're using. You can modify that. You can filter the OUs. So you don't want to send your whole Active Directory. You might have a number of service accounts in there, or maybe admin accounts. You don't want those moved to 365. So you can just select a specific OU or branches of the OU that you want synced. And you can run the AD Connect tool multiple times. So if you want to change the configuration, maybe doing synchronization, and you want to move to federated, run it again, and it will update the configuration, so you don't have to go and do all the manual tasks. As I said, the Express mode sets up synchronization in just 4 clicks. So briefly, I'll go through those customized options. Well, first of all, I'll show you what an identity looks like in the cloud. I'll go through the custom options, and then we'll run through the Express setup. And I'll show you how the accounts then look in 365 once they've been synced. Type in the right password. So here's our accounts in Office 365, and they've been classed as or set as a status of in cloud. So they're our cloud identity users. Incidentally, if you want to have a look at the Azure AD, so if you want to look at a bit more behind what's available in this portal, you can click on this Azure AD link and actually look in Azure AD and do some more stuff in there, which I'll talk about shortly. So over here I'm running a 2012 server with just an AD setup, and I've got my 6 example accounts here in Active Directory. And we're going to run the AD Connect, oops, that's not it, AD Connect tool. So I've already pre-installed this. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes to do a number of the prerequisites to get it up and running. And if we go through the customize options here, you can see that we can answer some of the questions of what we want to do. What sort of scenario or installation or identity do we want to do? So we do federation. We've got some new options here that have popped up that we need to complete, or we can do nothing at all. So we do federation, and then we go next. We log on to our Office 365 tenant. So this is going to validate, spelled my domain correctly. So let's have a look at what's online, what our domains are there. And then we can add our local So then it's going to have a look and see what domains we have. And so this is where you'd add multiple domains. You'd go through each domain and add them in to this list. And then it's going to look in the schema and start going through the options. So you can see we can go through various options. We can select how we want to identify users, which attributes are we going to match to do the identification. So it's going to use the user principal name by default and the object GUID as well, which the default should be left. And then you can do some filtering, so we can enter that group or name if you want to do the pilot, or we synchronize all users. And then optional features. So this is about, these I want to use write back. I want to do password sync. I want to select. So you can be very selective in these attributes, of which I have to turn write back off because we don't want to do that. So you can control what you want to have access to in Office 365 and which attributes need to be synchronized to do that. So yeah, those are all the advanced options. Let's go back and do an Express setup. It's the same thing. We need to log on again. Examining our domains. All right, so we need to log on to our local AD. The other thing you can do here is you can say don't start syncing immediately. So you can do all the preparation and get it all set up, ready to go. It just creates a task in the task scheduler. It says down here it's going to be disabled. And you can just go enable it and run it. And you can run it manually. By default, it's every 3 hours it'll do a sync. You can change that, of course. Or you can just go run the task if you want to force a synchronization. So we'll start it. So it's just checking the stuff that's been installed on this machine. And you can run AD Sync on a domain controller. You can run it on any other domain joined server. So it doesn't have to be a domain controller. So now it's just configuring our Azure Active Directory. I had already enabled it. You'll need to go and do that in the 365 portal. Synchronization rules. It's configuring my local Active Directory. It's actually creating a user account to read the Active Directory. So you see a new user created, turning on password sync. So if I just pop over here under users, we now have this new account that's been created, and it's actually tied in the description. It tells us it's running on this particular computer, the computer name. So you can run AD sync if you had, maybe run it to 2 different tenants. You could run it on 2 different machines and synchronize to 2 different 365 tenants if you wanted to do that. All right, so the configuration is complete. We can now log on to 365. Now there's also a service if you want to see what's going on called the synchronization service. And we can see here, if I do a refresh, it's created some connectors. There's one connector that's got a little SQL database running in the back end. One connector is reading the Active Directory, putting it in the database, and then it reads the database, reads the Azure Active Directory, and then does a bit of a comparison and pushes the changes up. We can see here that that's actually running, so it's running a process. If we go to operations, we can see there's a number of tasks that are gone. In this case, it's a full synchronization because it's the first time we've run it. Normally we just do the delta, so we'd only do the changes, obviously, for the sync. We wander back over to our 365 portal and we refresh our users. We can now see that we have some users as listed synced with Active Directory. So it didn't take very long for that to happen. Now if I want to go and change Jane, you see here I can't enter anything in those settings there, and it's actually telling me here that this user is synchronized and I can't be edited. I need to go back and do it on my local AD. Any questions about the demo? All good. Sorry. Go ahead. Hybrid in terms. So I can't quite hear you. You're talking about hybrid in terms of Exchange Hybrid? Yep, so Exchange Hybrid will work either way. So you can use a synchronized or federated. It's really more about how you extend the Exchange. So long as the account's in Active Directory, should be fine. And yes, so correct. So the question was, as if you have AD Premium, can you synchronize the details in Office 365 or Zero AD and synchronize it back to the local on-prem AD? Yes, you can. So that's one of the features of the Zero AD Premium is to do that. And that's how you also do the self-service password reset, because again, we need that synchronization. So our third scenario is Giga Beverages. They make this amazing drink that's taken the market by storm. They're a pretty large organisation. They've got 4 factories. They've got 300 staff, 50 servers, and 34 applications. They want to utilise all of the Office suite, so they have group-wide on-premises SharePoint. They want to utilise all of the Office 365 features. So, the SharePoint, the Exchange, BI, Skype for Business. They want to move a lot of their applications to Azure in the future, and they want to have that true single sign-on experience. So they don't want to have prompting for logons to access both applications in Azure and 365. So this is your typical sort of large enterprise organisation, or an organisation that's wanting to move a lot of their workloads into Azure. So how do we do that? Again, we run AD Connect and we synchronise the accounts. We still need to get the accounts up into Azure AD. And we take the option there to say I want to federate and run through the various questions to do that. However, we need to put some ADFS servers on premise. So now authentication is not happening on Windows Azure. When users either send their user accounts via Outlook, or they go to the portal and they enter their email address, it's going to look at the domain, the bit after the @ symbol. Now that domain has been flagged as federated. the user is going to get redirected to a on-prem server running ADFS. You enter the username and password, and they'll get a token from the local AD controllers, and the token gets passed back to 365, and they get the relevant access. Now, ADFS is obviously a lot more complex, because if the user can't get to ADFS, so maybe the ADFS servers are down, maybe your local internet connection is down, they can't authenticate, they won't get the token. If they don't get a token, they can't access 365. Now you will find if it's gone down and the user already has a token, the token has a time expiry on it. So they'll be fine for a while, they won't notice that ADFS has gone down. But if a user wants to, it's the first time they've authenticated that day or their token has expired, they won't get access. So they won't be able to get to email, they won't be able to do Skype, they won't get to SharePoint, they won't get maybe to those applications, those line of business applications running Azure. So it's really important, and Microsoft say sometimes you need up to 6 servers. You might need to put network load balancers in place. You might need to put proxy servers. You need to put them across multiple locations to make sure it's always available. So that's really why we say start simple. It's quite a complex implementation. So the tips and tricks is only implement really if it's required. If it's something you really want to do, you can get a very similar experience with the same sign-on, with the synchronized. And now we're getting a single sign-on type experience with Windows 10 and Azure AD. So maybe you don't need to use federated services unless you're going for lots of those large applications. If you are going to do it, you need to read the TechNet deployment guides. You need to get the planning right. If you get it wrong, it's quite difficult and it's a lot of work to change it. So you really need to understand how to do it. ADFS has been around for a while. It's not just a 365 thing. It's the technology Microsoft are using with 365. You can federate with other organizations. But for 365, we only need to implement the settings required for 365. So we don't need to worry about federating with someone else. As I said, it requires a lot of servers, it requires a lot of planning. So plan that out. Think about what are the server requirements. Are we going to put proxies? Are we going to put them in a perimeter network or DMZ? What IP addressing are we going to use? What's the DNS settings are we going to use? How many certificates and what sort of certificates am I going to use? Firewall rules we need to change. And what sort of network load balancing are we going to do if we're going to have multiple ADFS servers across an ADFS farm? And you may want to consider whether you put your ADFS servers and some domain controllers in Azure. Maybe that's a simpler, less complex way to do it. It's in the same data center as 365, so you don't kind of have that internet failure issue going on. It's a good place to put it. As they use the AD Connect tool, much easier to use, and enable the password sync as a backup. It's a fallback. If your ADFS isn't working, we can always go back to using the same sign-on. So the user will get prompted, but at least they'll have to log on with their same username and password as they do to log on to their PC, and I'll show you how you can do that. Unless the policy is disallowed. Just learned in the previous session that Microsoft, funny enough, don't synchronize, don't allow their password hashes to be synced. Seems a bit strange. And Outlook doesn't use true single sign-on. You can make it look like it's doing single sign-on with federation, but it's never been designed to do true single sign-on. I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And also make sure you have network time protocol running. Again, it sends the token. The token is time-stamped and has an expiry. I have had experiences where the ADFS servers didn't have it running, and they were out of sync by about 8 minutes, and authentication failed because the token was it was too far out in its time stamping. So make sure you've got good time working, which you should do anyway in an ADFS deployment. Other reasons for using federation, you maybe already have an identity system in place. So you've got ADFS already running, maybe you're federated with another organization, then you might as well carry on using it. You have an integrated smart card or multi-factor authentication solution already on-prem. So we can't do that in AD with whatever tool you're using. You're running some hybrid applications or hybrid search. So maybe you're running SharePoint online and on-site. Maybe you've got some data that can't be moved online. You don't want the situation where someone's accessing the online one, they click on a link to get something that's on SharePoint online from on-prem, and they get prompted. So you want to use federation services, so it's a very seamless experience. They just think it's one big SharePoint site, not aware of where they are. Maybe you're auditing the sign-in your AD, or you want immediate disable. Again, when you disable a user account, that's an attribute in AD. That attribute won't be synchronized until the next synchronization cycle with a synchronized identity. So it might be 3 hours that user can still access SharePoint, Skype, and maybe all those applications in Azure. So if you want it to disable it immediately, federated services. So single sign-on, minimizing prompts. Or maybe you have restrictions by network location or work hours, or simply you have a policy like Microsoft do that says you can't synchronize hashes to the cloud. So can we change between the models? Yes, we can. So we can start with the cloud identity, and we can move to the synchronized identity. We simply just run the AD Connect on one of our servers and follow the process I did, and it will do a hard or soft match. So it'll try and match up those accounts that you've had for a couple of months or years running online with those that are in your Active Directory. And then users will start getting that same sign-on experience. Can we go from synchronized identity to a full federated identity? Yes, again we can. We run AD Connect again, and we take the federated option. We reconfigure our system, and we do the federation. Of course, we would have done all that planning, and we know what sort of servers and where we're going to put them. And we leave the password sync enabled as a backup. And we do that because we can go from federated back to a synchronized identity. Again, I said before, when you make a domain in 365 federated, it changes the status of it. So this is a federated identity. I need to direct all users back to the on-prem AD for authentication. So we need to run this PowerShell command to switch it back to a standard one to say you need to start doing authentication in Azure AD. And you need to start using that password that's been synchronizing in the background. It does take 2 hours for that to change effect, and an hour per 2,000 users, because it's got a replicator right around all of the Azure AD data centers worldwide. So although it's a fallback, it's not an immediate fallback. There might be that 2 or 3 hour window if you can't get ADFS up and running. But at least you can fall back and do it. And maybe you've put in ADFS and you realize it's more complex than you need. We can go back to synchronized. And then we can always go back to the beginning. We go from synchronized identity back to a cloud identity, and we simply just turn off the synchronized option. To do that, that takes 72 hours, and you can run this PowerShell command to see where that progress is going. So we can go up and down the whole stack of identity models. So, I'm going quite quickly. Summary. So yeah, cloud identity, we talked about whether that's useful if you have no on-prem servers or you intend to remove those on-premise servers. So maybe you're doing, you want to remove your small business server or a small exchange and AD infrastructure, and you're just moving people up to 365, and then you're going to turn those machines off. You're doing a pilot, you're restructuring your AD, they're all good uses for it, and you need to consider where Windows 10 fits in. So maybe you don't need those other models if you're using Windows 10 and you can now authenticate with Azure AD. You can get a lot of that functionality you would have had previously with an on-premises AD controller. Now you can do it with Windows 10 and Azure AD. So kind of think of maybe the cloud identity is all you need. Synchronized identity. So again, if you have an on-premise server, you want users to have that same sign-on password. They're still going to be prompted, but they can use the same username and password for cloud identity. So that's good for those small, medium businesses. They want to start using some of these Azure services for that. Or we talked about the federated identity model, where you're moving a lot of workloads to Azure. You want to use a lot of the services of 365. You want to have that true single sign-on experience. Or you meet some of those specific requirements that you require for Azure, for Active Directory. But we need to make sure that our federated services are highly available and resilient so that we can continue to authenticate if one of them goes down. So again, just coming back to that key message, that really is the really important message from today's session. As I say, there is no need to rush to the federated services. You can start with that cloud identity. We can move to the synchronized identity, get that going, understand how that works, and then move to the federated. Even if you're doing a pilot, you can do it in those stages. Start with the cloud identity, get users starting to use it, move to the synchronized, make sure that's all working. yep, that works well, and then you can start to plan the federated, so you can learn and move with the stages. As I said, with the synchronized and the federated, you still need an Exchange server or some way to edit those Exchange attributes. So that might be a reason or part of your decision making. As I said, Windows 10 will have an effect on your choice. So there are some new features coming out. So we talked about Outlook's not quite truly enabled for single sign-on. So there's now a DAL coming out. And there was a session earlier this morning about 101 ways to authenticate to Active Directory, Zero Active Directory. We talked a bit about this. DAL stands for the Active Directory Authentication Library. It's actually been enabled. It's been downloaded in an update with Office in about November last year, but it's been disabled. It's been disabled because it's been in private preview, and now it's in public preview. So you can go to the URL, that first URL there on top of that list, to look at the preview and join to that. It enables IT to configure new security scenarios for signing into 365. It's really around Office. Supports multi-factor authentication for Office clients, smart cards and certificate authentication. So that was one of the reasons to go ADFS. It might not be any more with this and maybe a synchronized model or a cloud identity model. And Outlook no longer requires basic authentication. That's why you're getting prompted to log in or to do a more true single sign-on. If you want to find out more about single sign-on and how to maybe set up Outlook to work or give that single sign-on experience before DAL is released with Federation, there's some URLs there. You can read some more articles about that. The other one now is you can brand it. So it used to be available only in AD Premium. You can now change the logo, the text and the colours. So you can put your help desk information in your phone number or some text for users and what to do, how to log on, and give it an image. Make it look like it's your page so the users don't feel like they're going to a Microsoft page, they're going to your page. Make it very seamless for them. They may not even be aware it's 365. You can do that with that Azure AD link that I showed you in the Office 365 portal. You need to go into Azure AD, look at your Active Directory that's been created, and then go configure, and then configure some of the settings in there. And the other ones I talked about, self-service password reset. Again, used to be an AD Premium subscription feature. It's now available across all 365 subscriptions. So if you're running the cloud identity model, then users can use that immediately. They need to go set it up. They need to set up their pre-arranged alternative personal information, bunch of security questions. And importantly, they need to set up their mobile phone or a phone number because it's going to call them and they do the password reset to validate they are who they are. So that's already prefixed. If you want to use it with synchronized, again, you need the AD Premium subscription. So we can get that password synchronized from Azure AD back to on-prem. There's some related Ignite sessions that you might find of interest. There was one yesterday about Azure AD and Active Directory Premium, which was very interesting. I suggest you download that. There's a great one on tomorrow, again, about Windows 10, Azure AD and Intune, so how to get that fully managed desktop. Azure AD in the Enterprise was on yesterday, and as I said, there was the authentication one today, and tomorrow is that excellent session about looking behind the scenes of 365. If you do have any questions or you want to get hold of me, you can contact me on this email address. You're welcome to do that. Any questions? Because I've gone through the session quite quickly. No further questions. There's some more resources. So if you want to download this session or the other ones, go to the Channel 9. I'm sure you've seen these repetitively today. And obviously, you please complete your session and win. Has anyone won anything? Because I haven't won anything yet. No? It's just a Bruce. Can't be true. That's the end of my session. I must talk too fast.